moving on to the smoldering remains of college football. We mentioned it last week that the Colorado State Rams were under investigation for how they were handling their COVID practices, and it just got worse and worse as the week went on. They're now under investigation for a toxic culture within the athletic department that includes verbal abuse and racism, maybe. This all came out in the Coloradan. Highly recommended that story. All sort of focusing around athletic director Joe Parker and the decisions that he's made, going back to basketball coach Larry Eustace, who was fired for being abusive verbally towards his players, and throwing stuff. He was all over the place. Apparently, he had a handler that wasn't a very good handler, like within the athletic department. That's how out of control that situation was. Mike Bobo was accused of this. There were people named on and off the record, former coach of the Rams and current coach, the guy that just loves being a dude, Steve Adazio, and his staff also being thrown through the mud. So before
The current coach who has yet to be able to coach.
coach only in that he is head of practices, but no more. Colorado State announced that they were suspending all operations within the football team as they investigated this. They have an outside investigator, but the Mountain West has now called it quits on the fall football season. Not alone, the Big Ten and Pac-12 also will not be playing football in the fall. Right now we have the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 going it alone. Dabo Swinney of Clemson saying that it really doesn't devalue any championship they're going to win. It's just
They weren't going to be playing Big Ten or Pac-12 schools anyway, so
it's just sort of madness. There's threats of a union from the players. There's threats of lawsuits from players that play, like class action lawsuits that could bankrupt conferences and universities. It is unlike anything we've ever seen, and college football has not been a stable entity over the last 10 years.
it's been a stable entity only because fans, to our shame and credit, can compartmentalize all the BS really well because we just like waking up on crisp fall Saturdays and watching like 10 hours of football from teams we don't actually care about, but it has been such a good thing. But I saw a tweet that was really striking. It's like, this is just revealing that a lot of schools are actually just football teams that offer classes as a side hustle. That football is such an engine, even for a team like CSU that has never been that good. They're not selling merch out the wazoo. They don't have nationally televised games. But the football team is so important to revenue that they are like a corrupt Belarusian dictatorship in terms of aggression and silence.
Yeah, I mean, people go to these schools for the football experience. So, like, it's not just like, most of the money that the football team technically makes is in the athletic department. But when you think about the money it brings into the town, how it gets people to get tuition, all of this, and it just doesn't, like, the system doesn't make any sense. Like, if you step back and think about it, you're like, the most prestigious higher education places in the country are ruled by amateur sports.
Yeah.
Like it's just a system that just is so out of control, and no real clear path for how any of this is going to end. How the SEC, which would probably try to have fans because they're trying to have fans already in MLS, like the only thing they can have fans in, they're like, we're going to do fans.
Well, MLS has the benefit of always being socially distant because so few people care about MLS.
I don't know. I mean, it's impossible to say what's going to happen. It'll be interesting to see if any of these conferences make it to kickoff in a little over a month because they've all moved it back a little bit. From a CU football perspective, obviously they were at a huge disadvantage, losing their coach right before spring practices would have started, getting Carl Durrell. It was going to be a rough year as it is. In some ways, this buys them time to figure things out. But I mean, it's hard, but as you know, my position is, in some ways, I would be okay if CU got rid of football just to save me from the heartache and all of the moral quandaries of, like, what are we doing to these kids? But also just, like, being so ingrained as a Buff. Like, it's, like, the most, like, identity team that I have, even though they're terrible.
Yeah, well, that's such a tough thing. Like losing Mel Tucker in January, was it? Or
I think February, yeah.
And that betrayal and just being like, why can't the Buffs catch a break? Only then to get a larger picture of everything. It's like, oh, no one catches a break. Some people catch corona. And then also thinking about the NCAA tournament where the Buffs were going to be a decent seed, even though they absolutely limped into
in basketball.
There's, it really is just like a lot of misery and stress.
I think so. The basketball has also been put on hold for the fall. No Pac-12 sports in the fall. Tad Boyle's pretty mad about this decision because as he pointed out, they don't start playing basketball until November. So you're saying basically like it won't be fine in November, it will be fine in January. Which, I mean, we all know that it's probably not going to be fine in January. But I get his point. And McKinley Wright announced last week that he was going to come back for his senior year instead of trying to go into the NFL draft or the NHL draft, NBA draft, the third one. So it is, I mean, to that part, it's disappointing because they have the talent still, the Buffs do, to compete, and we know it's cyclical because the players turn over.